In this Diablo 4 video, I'm going to be showing you my Direwolf build. This is a level 70 plus Druid build that focuses on shifting into Werewolf and using the Shred ability. This is sort of a continuation of the Shredder build. If you saw that one, that was a tier 3 build. So just to recap, this build focuses on the use of the Shred ability, and there are a couple things that Shred does for us because of a couple aspects that we're using. First, because we're using Stormclaw's aspect, you're going to deal up to 30% of your damage dealt when you critically strike as lightning damage to the target and surrounding enemies. If you use this on a two-handed weapon, this can be up to 60%, and this is a huge amount of damage. Just imagine for a second you crit, and then you send up to 60% of that damage to the target again, which is critical damage, and then to everything around you. That is a huge amount of damage. You're getting potentially a 60% increase in damage when you critically strike. So if you have a high crit chance, this could be huge for your build. Now, if you're using the Waxing Gibbous Unique, which is fantastic for this build, it's a one-handed weapon, so you'd probably have this on your amulet, getting you 45% or so ideally on this. That's about as much as you can get if you're using that. Highly recommend using that if you have it for this build. I don't have it here, so I've done a two-handed weapon in order to get the most damage possible from this. And the other part of this is the aspect of the Blurred Beast, which makes it so that when you dash with Shred, when you attack and you actually teleport to a target, nearby poisoned enemies instantly take poison damage dealt to them. This is up to 90%. If you had this on an amulet, it'd be up to 135%. If you had it on a two-handed weapon, it'd be up to 180%. This is a staggering amount of damage. This allows you to use something like Poison Creeper and then move backward a few steps and then attack with Shred, teleporting into the group, and then you absolutely obliterate them instantly. You'll see enemies go down without even taking, doesn't even show you hitting them sometimes. It does so much damage. But the problem with this is that it takes some setup. Like Poison Creeper has a long cooldown, and if you use Rabies with this build, you gotta let Rabies spread around. And if you're talking about clear speed, it's not the only thing that's gonna make you have good clear speed, because you're gonna be waiting for those two things, which is why we also use the Stormclaw aspect, because this allows us to just jump right into enemies and do huge damage, whether they're poisoned or not. So those two aspects alone are essentially going to make it so that you have no problem dealing damage. So the only two other problems you need to solve as a werewolf are how to stay alive and how to manage your spirit. Every druid has problems managing your spirit. You'll have a little bit of issue with this build, particularly early on, but we've done some things here, and I'll talk about what I've done to help with spirit management. So first, spirit cost reduction. If you can get spirit cost reduction on your amulet and your boots minimally, this would be huge. You can get up to like 16, 17% on your amulet, and you can get up to like 7.5%, 8% at this point of the game. That's like 20-some%. That's going to take Shred's cost down significantly, allowing you to spam it a lot more easily. So I highly recommend getting both of these on both of those parts if possible, and anywhere else that you can get spirit cost reduction. Unfortunately, my amulet doesn't have spirit cost reduction, which makes my Shred management a little bit harder in this build, but I have amazing rolls for other things on it, and I could not find a better amulet. So another thing we've done is we've taken the Energized Spirit Boon, which makes it so on lucky hit, dealing damage has up to a 15% chance to restore 10 spirit. This is a good amount of spirit, and it's going to trigger sometimes. It's not going to trigger all the time, but getting extra spirit any way you can is fantastic. And this will just happen without even you knowing it, helping to keep you topped up. And another way is by using the aspect of the Umbral, which makes it so that when you crowd control an enemy, you get up to 4 spirit. We do this via Poison Creeper, but also from any poison we do because of the Neurotoxin passive. That makes it so our poisons slow enemies, so anytime we put poison on enemies, they're effectively crowd controlled. And this helps to give you some spirit, but it's not that great in my opinion, because you're just flying around and you don't get a lot of, spirit from each enemy, and you need to basically crowd control about 8 or 9 enemies in order to use one use of Shred. So that's a lot. So I highly recommend the Starlight aspect if you can find that instead, and this makes it so that you gain up to 20 of your resource, in this case spirit, for every 25% of your health you heal. And we constantly heal with this build because we're using Blood Howl, we're jumping into enemies, we're attacking, we're healing via our attacks with Shred, and also with the Masochistic Spirit Boon, which heals us every time we critically strike with a shape-shifting skill. So we're constantly healing, and this is a great way to get energy back without having to worry about it. And if you can max roll this, getting 20 to pop, that's way more than you're probably going to get from Aspect the Umbral. So now talking about survival part, how do we stay alive when using this build? And the first thing that I've done here is taken the Vigorous aspect of my helmet, and this makes it so that you gain up to 15% damage reduction while shapeshifted into werewolf form. This is pretty much 99% of the time, so you're just going to get flat damage reduction, which is great. I'm also using the unique Mad Wolf's Glee here. This gives you +2 to your werewolf skills, which is great, but it also gives you damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned. And this can be up to like 20-some% or something like that. That's a huge amount of damage reduction. So make sure you put your poisons on enemies And this is one of the reasons that we use the upgrade of Shred that actually applies poison to enemies rather than the one that gives you critical chance, because we want to keep enemies poisoned. And this is also one of the reasons that we use Claw, not only because we gain 2 ranks to it from Werewolf here, but because it keeps poison on an enemy and you're going to gain damage reduction as long as poison's on an enemy. So if you're fighting a boss or something like that, it's going to prevent some damage that's being constantly dealt to you. On my waist, I have Aspect of Protector to give me a barrier when fighting elites, but you could easily use the Aspect of Disobedience as well, which gives you total armor. Either of these is good here to give you more protection. And another way we help mitigate damage is by the use of Hurricane. Hurricane makes it so that if you take the upgrade, one of them, makes it so that you get 20% less damage from enemies that are in your Hurricane. So if you run into a group of enemies, you get that 20% damage reduction from everything it's hitting. You have your Werewolf damage reduction. If you have Aspect of Disobedience, you're going to have more armor. If you have Mad Wolf's Glee on there, you're going to have damage reduction from poison enemies, which they'll probably all be. So this is really, really great. And also on my boots, I have Storm Shifter's Aspect, which makes it so that while Hurricane is active, we gain +2 to shapeshifting skills. So this is Claw, this is Shred, and also Bloodhouse. So we're going to gain ranks to that while we have Hurricane up, which is a nice synergy. And then probably most importantly, we have the Direwolf's Aspect, which is the namesake of this build. And it's what this does is it makes it so that the ultimate Grisly Rage, which is normally a Werebear skill, actually turns you into a Dire Werewolf for its duration, increasing your movement speed instead of giving you damage reduction, and also reduces the spirit cost of your abilities for the duration. And it also makes it so that when you kill enemies, you heal for 10% of your maximum life. Again, this is why the Starlight Aspect would come in handy here, because you're going to be healing constantly with this. But what's really important about using this ultimate ability is you have Unstoppable for the duration of it, meaning you can just stand in crowd control and it does nothing to you, and you usually heal through it with Masochist, with this, with Shred. All these things add together for healing. So you're very, very tanky when this is up, and this is your like, oh crap, there's 5 elites on the screen, you know, AoE everywhere, CC everywhere. You pop this, and then you try and take them out as quickly as you can, and if not, then you back away, wait for it to come off cooldown, and try it again, because this way you cannot be CC'd. And there's a fantastic aspect you can use for this build called Aspect of the Rampaging Werebeast. This makes it so that you extend the duration of Grisly Rage by up to 5 seconds, and if you have this on your amulet, this would be like 7.5 seconds. And this is fantastic for this build. You could consider putting it on your amulet if you're not using Stormclaw Aspect on it to get you an even longer Grisly Range. And if you have cooldown on your helmet and cooldown on your amulet, cooldown on your boots or something like that, you can get Grisly Rage cooldown down to like 40 seconds or something like that. This can make it so that you're using Grisly Rage for like, you know, every 20 seconds you're using it or so. And that's really, really strong. I happen to have Accelerating Aspect on my amulet. I just had it there from a previous build, and I have a max roll of it. It's really, really good for this. It makes you shred really, really fast. It's one you can consider using for this build, but if you have all these other aspects and you have really good rolls on them, I would highly recommend replacing that one. So talking about our Paragon board, what I've done here in our first glyph socket is put Exploit. This makes it so when you damage an enemy, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. Vulnerable is just a huge way to gain damage in this game. It's absolutely amazing. Every build should have some form of vulnerable if possible, or you should be playing with people who have it, because it's deadly. And when you teleport to enemies into a group of enemies with Shred, or you use Poison Creeper on them, they're all going to become vulnerable instantly, taking more damage from you. I have a lot of damage to vulnerable on my staff, which makes this even more deadly. So moving along to my second board, I have Lust for Carnage, and this makes it so when you critically strike with Werewolf skills, you restore 2 spirit. This kind of helps mitigate some of that spirit problem that this build has. Shred is super expensive. You use it constantly, and this will help ease a little bit of that. So you want to get this right away when you can. Wild's Call is also really good for this as another rare node in this tree. It gives you attack speed, which is great for this build, and maximum spirit, helping you have a bigger pool so that when you attack, you know you have a bigger pool to drain before you run out. There are also lots of nodes in this one that give you werewolf damage and werewolf critical damage, stuff like that. So these are really good. And in my second glyph socket here, I've put Fang and Claw. And there are a couple reasons for that. First, it makes it so close enemies take 12% increased damage from you. You can struggle to have damage with this build sometimes. And this helps to increase that when you're next to enemies. So if you teleport into a group of enemies with Shred, now all of a sudden they're taking 12% more damage from you, which is great. Secondly, it boosts the magic nodes around the socket. The magic nodes around this socket in particular are Werewolf skill damage, healing received, and there's also going to be Dexterity and Intelligence once you expand it to level 15. All these are really, really good for this build, particularly on the next board. Dexterity and Intelligence are needed to make the extra bonuses on your rare nodes, so those are really good. But this isn't necessarily the best glyph for this build. Unfortunately, we really need this board for the spirit management and the legendary thing, or otherwise you run out of spirit. You just run out of it, and you can have other boards that have sockets around them that allow you to use other dexterity-based sockets that are probably better for this build, but unfortunately this board just doesn't allow it, particularly when you're not at level 15. So this is kind of what I went with. And the next board I went with is Ancestral Guidance. This makes it so after spending 75 spirit, you deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. That's a huge amount of damage. But more importantly, there's a few rare nodes in this area that we really, really need. First, we have Reclamation, which makes it so that you gain maximum spirit, but more importantly has plus spirit on kill, and there are a couple magic nodes around it also that give you plus spirit on kill. So between Lust for Carnage and between Reclamation and the nodes around it, you're going to gain a lot of spirit back from attacking and killing enemies. And that really, really helps to offset some of the spirit problems that you'll have with this build. We also take Natural Attunement here, which gives you maximum spirit, maximum life. Both of these are really good for this build. Obviously, more spirit. The more spirit you can have, the more times you can use Shred before you run out of spirit. So it's really good to have high max spirit, because you can always top yourself off before you go into a fight, and then you can use Shred a lot more times. That's really, really good. And there's a lot of magic nodes around it also that give you maximum spirit and also more maximum life. So this is really, really nice. And there's other nodes in this tree that give you more core skill damage, which is great because that's going to apply to Shred. And then obviously there's another socket here as well. So that kind of wraps up our Direwolf build. I really, really enjoyed playing this build. I think probably between that and the Rapid Fire Archer build, these are probably my two favorite builds. You're just zipping around the screen. With this build, you have high damage, you have high burst, you have high mobility, you have good survivability. You're very, very tanky, particularly when you pop Direwolf. And it's just a ton of fun to play. And if you've been looking for a good werewolf build, this is definitely one I would recommend. Stay tuned for more Diablo 4 build guides and general guides. And if you guys have things you want to see, let me know in the comments below.